We often think of science, especially, dinosaurs, as these fixed facts, set in stone, almost literally.
Right, but it's really much more fluid, isn't it? Ideas shift, understanding evolve.
Exactly. And that brings us perfectly to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
The story behind a dinosaur name you might not know, Antrodemus.
Ah, yes, Antrodemus. It might sound obscure, but its story is directly tied to a very, very famous Jurassic predator.
And our sources really lay out this whole history, don't they? From discovery to confusion and back again.
They do. It's a fantastic case study, really, in how paleontology works, how names get established, and sometimes how they get reconsidered.
So our aim today is to untangle this puzzle for you. We want to give you a clear sense of where Antrodemus came from, why it was important for a while, and why you mostly hear Allosaurus today.
Let's dig in. It all starts, interestingly enough, with just one bone.
Found where again?
Middle Park, Colorado. Probably back in the late 1860s. A piece of a tail vertebra.
Just one piece?
Just one piece. And we don't even know who first picked it up. It ended up with Ferdinand van Devere Hayden in 1869, kind of secondhand.
And Hayden noted something interesting about finds in that area.
Yeah, he mentioned that locals were finding similar fossils and, get this, thinking they were petrified horse hooves.
Horse hooves. Wow. That really shows how early the science was back then. People were seeing things for the first time.
Absolutely. They didn't have the vast collections and knowledge we have now. So, okay, Hayden gets this vertebra, knows it's something, and sends it off to Joseph Leidy.
Leidy, a big name in early American paleontology. What was his take in 1870?
Well, his first impression, looking back, is quite telling. He thought it belonged to a European genus, Poecilopleuron.
Okay.
And he named the species Poecilopleuron valens. He even misspelled the genus name slightly at first.
Poecilopleuron, why link it to a European dinosaur?
The key feature for him was this large internal cavity, the medullary cavity. He saw a similarity there.
Hollow space inside the bone. Got it. So no Antrodemus just yet.
Not as the official name, no. But Leidy was already noticing differences. He saw these internal struts, trabeculae, inside the cavity, and their pattern was different from the European Poecilopleuron. So even then, he actually floated the idea. He said, look, if we find more evidence this is unique, maybe it needs its own genus.
And he proposed the name.
He did. He suggested Antrodemus, meaning chamber-bodied, again, focusing on that big internal cavity.
So the name was there, lurking, right from the start almost.
Pretty much. He was hedging his bets, you could say.
So how long until he made it official? When did Antrodemus actually become the genus name?
Didn't take too long. Only 3 years later, 1873. Leidy revisited it and decided, yes, this is distinct enough. He formally published it as Antrodemus valens.
Okay, so Antrodemus valens is officially on the books, a new dinosaur genus and species.
For the time being, yes.
But, as we know, that's not the end of it. Things get complicated later when Allosaurus enters the picture more prominently. Let's skip ahead now. 1920, Charles W. Gilmore.
Right, Gilmore. He was doing a big study of meat-eating dinosaur fossils at the U.S. National Museum.
And he looked at Leidy's original Antrodemus vertebra.
He did, and he came to a pretty major conclusion. He said, looking at this bone, it's basically identical to the tail vertebrae of Allosaurus.
Whoa. So Allosaurus had been named by then, a few years after Leidy's initial description.
Yes. Allosaurus was named in 1877 by Othniel Charles Marsh. So Gilmore is looking at both and saying, these look the same to me.
So if they're the same animal, which name should be used? That seems like a key question.
Exactly. And Gilmore went with the rules, the rule of priority.
Meaning the first valid name published gets priority.
Correct. And since Antrodemus, or at least the species valens under Poecilopleuron, was published in 1870 before Allosaurus in 1877.
Gilmore argued that Antrodemus should be the correct name for Allosaurus.
That was his conclusion. He proposed that Antrodemus had priority and should be the accepted scientific name.
That's huge. So for decades, the dinosaur we picture as Allosaurus was actually known in scientific circles as Antrodemus.
You got it. For well over 50 years, Antrodemus was the technically preferred name in the literature. It took a while for that to really filter down, but yes.
Can you give an example of that, like in museums?
Oh, absolutely. The Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in Utah, it's famous for just tons and tons of Allosaurus bones.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Well, the very first skeleton they mounted from there, back in the late 30s or early 40s, it was displayed at Princeton for ages. Until just recently, actually.
And it was labeled.
For many, many years, it was labeled Antrodemus.
Wow. That really drives it home. Imagine seeing that iconic skeleton with a name most people today wouldn't recognize.
Exactly. There's also mention of a replica skull from the 50s clearly labeled Antrodemus. So yeah, it was definitely the established name for a good chunk of the 20th century.
It just shows how science isn't static, like you said. Names we think are solid can have these hidden histories.
Totally. But of course the story shifts again. Antrodemus didn't stick around forever.
Right, so why did we go back to Allosaurus? This involves James Madsen's work, correct?
Yes. Jim Madsen, his work, especially stuff he did in the 70s, but really synthesized later, was key. He looked critically at that original Antrodemus vertebra.
And what was the problem?
The problem, fundamentally, was the specimen itself, that one partial tailbone. Madsen argued it just wasn't diagnostic enough.
Meaning it didn't have enough unique features to confidently say, yes, this specific bone represents this distinct genus.
Precisely. It was kind of generic as far as large theropod tail vertebrae go.
Yeah.
Plus, there was another issue. Nobody knew exactly where it came from.
The locality information was poor.
Very poor. Probably the Morrison Formation, sure, but the precise spot, the specific layer, unknown. And that context is really important in paleontology.
So you have this one slightly ambiguous bone with a fuzzy origin story.
Compared to, by this point, numerous nearly complete Allosaurus skeletons from well-documented sites like Cleveland Lloyd.
The evidence for Allosaurus was just overwhelmingly better.
Exactly. Madsen made that case, and most paleontologists since have agreed. That single vertebra isn't a strong enough foundation to anchor the genus name Antrodemus.
So what happens to the name Antrodemus then?
It gets designated a Nomen Dubium.
A dubious name. Latin's handy in science.
It is. It basically means the original type specimen is too fragmentary or nondescript to be sure what genus it belongs to. So while Antrodemus technically has date priority,
It's not useful because we can't be sure what it is.
you nailed it. Allosaurus is based on much, much better material, so it remains the valid, usable name for that famous predator. Antrodemus valens is still technically a species, but we can't confidently assign other fossils to it.
And this tangled history also means some other names got pulled in as synonyms.
Right. Because of all the back and forth, names like Poecilopleuron valens, lady's first attempt, Megalosaurus valens, another early classification attempt, and even Allosaurus valens are all generally considered synonyms of Antrodemus valens. It's a bit messy.
Or a real taxonomic tangle. And just to place it, where does Antrodemus valens sit in the grand scheme of classification now?
Okay, for the classifiers out there, it's within Eukaryota, Animalia, Chordata, Dinosauria, Serischia, Theropoda, and specifically within the family Allosauridae. So definitely related to Allosaurus, just dubiously named.
So wrapping this all up,
Yeah.
we've gone from a single bone in Colorado to the naming of Antrodemus to it actually replacing Allosaurus for 50 years based on priority.
Only for Allosaurus to come back strong because the original Antrodemus material was deemed, well, insufficient. A Nomen Dubium.
It's such a great illustration of how science works, isn't it? It's not just about finding things, but constantly reevaluating, checking the evidence, applying the rules, and sometimes admitting that early interpretations weren't quite right.
Absolutely. It's a process. Self-correcting, ideally. New
Yeah.
finds, new analyses, they keep refining our picture of the past.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, listening. How many other things that we sort of take for granted as known in science might have similar stories? What currently accepted facts might shift as we learn more or develop new ways to look at the evidence?
It really underscores the need to keep asking questions, keep exploring, doesn't it? Science is never truly finished.